Day after two Europe-bound boats sank off the coast of the country. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Ucha Koronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria struggles to bring its citizens into a regulated financial system. And South Africa's car sales bounced back in May following a COVID-19 induced slump. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's start the hour in Nigeria, where authorities are attempting to secure the return of 136 students abducted by gunmen on Sunday. The children, some as young as 5 years old, were kidnapped from an Islamic school in northern Nigeria when an armed gang on motorcycles attacked the town of Tigina. In the days that followed, state officials contacted parents to determine the exact number of missing children. Initial estimates suggested 200 children had been abducted. Criminal gangs have been blamed for the rise in kidnap for ransom in northern Nigeria in recent months. More than 800 students have been abducted since December. Well, let's get you more on this. We're now joined by CGTN's Deji Badmos in Lagos. Deji, to begin with, just give us an update on these abducted students.
Well, Lindy, at the moment, what the Niger State government, by the way, is actually coordinating the entire effort to free the students. It says it is still trying to rescue the girls, to rescue the children now. What we do not know at this time, Lindy, is whether what the government is trying to do is a rescue or some kind of negotiation. But then the government had made it clear that it would not pay ransom to the bandits to secure the release of the children. At some point it said it would not negotiate, but we understand there's some kind of talks going on. The government is not disclosing the details of those talks, but we understand the talks are going on. The bandits, of course, as we know, have demanded $42,000. The government says it will not pay. The parents actually had a press conference earlier today. They said on their own they've been able to raise some money, but of course nothing close to what the bandits are asking. But the government has said it is not going to pay any form of ransom at all, that it is going to ensure that the students are released on hand and without any money exchanging hands. How that is going to happen, for now, we do not know. And as I said earlier, we do not know whether there's a rescue operation going on or a negotiation taking place. The government is keeping everything close to its chest and promising that the children will be released sooner than later.
I suppose it is understandable that the government is playing its cards close to its chest. It is, after all, a very sensitive matter with very vulnerable people being at risk. But tell us, Deji, why is it then that schools in particular are targeted in these kidnap for ransom cases?
I think schools are targeted because the bandits basically aim for maximum impact. You take, for instance, 100 students. It draws attention to themselves. Other than that, it puts pressure on the government to negotiate to release the students. We've seen that in the past. Last year, we saw a number of schools attacked. Students were taken, and the government was, enormous pressure was brought on the government. The government was forced to negotiate with the bandits. In some cases, money actually exchanged hands. The only place where we saw the government putting a stop to this was in the case of Kaduna, when the bandits actually attacked the College of Forestry Mechanization. The government decided it was not going to pay, but eventually what we've gathered is that the parents were able to raise the money to pay the bandits. So I think the bandits do this for maximum impact, and they also do it expecting to reap huge financial gains, if you like. So, you kidnap, for instance, take the case of Tigina, where these children were abducted, some of them as young as 4. There's enormous pressure now on the government to ensure that the children are released. Of course, the government is standing its ground that it would not pay ransom. But look, to be candid, the government is facing enormous pressure. And you just can't rule out the possibility that the government might do deals with the bandits without actually making it public. But truth is that these bandits are targeting schools, not because they are trying to stop people from going to school. The ideology is, of course, different from Boko Haram. They're doing it because they're making massive gains from this, financial gains. Lindy?
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for that. Deji Badmus live for us there in Lagos. Now, France says it is suspending its joint military operations with Malian troops. The move is part of efforts to pressure Mali's military junta into restoring a civilian-led government. France's Ministry of Armed Forces says French soldiers will continue operating independently in Mali, pending a reassessment of the decision. Mali's military arrested interim President Bando and Prime Minister Mokhtar Ouane last week and pressured them to resign. Now, this has derailed the country's path towards democratic elections following last year's military coup. Former Vice President Assimi Goïta, who led the August coup and last week's revolt, was declared president last Friday.
The overall mission of Operation Barkhane will be continuing. What is ending is that support for Mali's national forces, suspension of military aid to Mali's national army, the embedding of French planning officers, liaison officers working with the Malian national forces to help them on their missions, also to try to eradicate the armed groups. That is going to be suspended pending a review that France has demanded from Mali, that there will be a civilian-led government imposed sooner rather than later. We have heard an enhancement of the rhetoric in the last couple of days. We've heard from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, describing what has happened as an unacceptable coup d'etat within a coup d'etat, because, as you mentioned, it's the second such military takeover of the government in 9 months. The first one in August 2020, France denounced, but also was willing to bite its lip if it did eventually end up in a civilian-led democratic government in Mali. But now what we have seen is the second such coup d'etat taking place, and so France has had to make this major move of suspending military aid, working with the economic community of West African states, working with the African Union, which has demanded an unhindered, transparent and rapid restoration of civilian-led rule in Mali, and that is something that France wants to see as well. Also, Paris reserving the right, perhaps, to go even further, to double down on Mali if it's not satisfied with the guarantees it is demanded to receive from Bamako.
And that was CGTN's Ross Cullen reporting from Paris. Meanwhile, the West African regional bloc ECOWAS and the African Union have suspended Mali from their respective organizations and threatened sanctions. Well, let's turn to developments coming out of South Africa now. The country's health minister, Zweli Mkhize, is considering resigning over an investigation into a tendering scandal. According to reports, President Cyril Ramaphosa has discussed 3 options with Mkhize. They include Mkhize being dropped from the cabinet in a reshuffle or a voluntary temporary suspension while the probe continues. The third option is that the minister resigns. The health minister, who is considered a possible successor to President Ramaphosa, is under scrutiny over an $11 million government contract to help communicate the national response to the coronavirus pandemic. An investigative report revealed the money was largely wasted and proper procurement processes were not followed. Well, staying in South Africa, health experts are calling for stricter COVID-19 restrictions as the country enters its 3rd wave of the pandemic. And besides their concern over South Africa's slow vaccine rollout, experts fear that COVID fatigue has led to more people not adhering to safety protocols. Here's Rhino with more.
This is what most South African cities looked like when the country first went into a hard COVID-19 shutdown, lockdown level 5, in March 2020. Now, 15 months later, on the brink of a 3rd wave on lockdown level 2, the South African Medical Association says it's concerned that South Africans are suffering from COVID fatigue.
We know about the virus. We know how the virus behaves. It's been around long enough, and I think the science is getting on top of it. What we're battling with is human behavior. Right now, the virus is not the problem. The problem is the way we are behaving. And the biggest driver for any new wave is complacency.
We've been asking residents for more than a year now to stay inside, to avoid public gatherings, to wear masks, social distancing, hand washing. And we are seeing a bit of COVID fatigue set in, where people are no longer as interested in observing these messages as they were at the beginning of the lockdown. People are tired. People are burnt out.
Experts say they're concerned that people have a false sense of security attending non-essential gatherings and not adhering to COVID-19 safety protocols.
There's a certain level of openness. Churches are open. And what has happened? We think COVID is over. And so it's gatherings, it's families, it's parties. We have lost all sense of seriousness about COVID. We've lost that sense of vigilance. And everyone's doing their own thing.
Many ordinary South Africans on the street say they cannot wait for life to return to the way things were before the coronavirus pandemic and COVID-19 regulations, but say they've learned to accept that the new normal is probably here to stay for a pretty long time.
Yeah, I think everyone has had enough of COVID now. If you just have a look around what it's doing to the economy of the country as well.
Everybody's tired. Even though COVID's been with us for such a long time, I'm still that person who kind of forgets her mask because I just want it over.
And as the daily coronavirus positivity rate continues to increase, doctors are calling on South Africans not to rely on government restrictions, but to take personal responsibility to protect themselves and their loved ones. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, the Democratic Republic of Congo has also announced a third wave of COVID infections. According to Health Minister Jean-Jacques Mbogani, the DRC has recorded a considerable rise in cases and deaths over the past 4 weeks. Here's more now from CGTN's Chris Ochamringa in Kinshasa.
Health officials in the DRC have recorded an exponential rise in COVID-19 cases since last month. More than 1,500 cases have been recorded across the country. The DRC health minister has announced the third wave of infections and urged the public to wear masks and maintain social distance. Congolese experts say the Beta variant first detected in South Africa and the Delta variant detected in India are now circulating in the country. The World Health Organization has expressed concern about the presence of the Delta variant in the DRC due to the country's poor healthcare system. The epicenter of the pandemic is in the DRC capital, Kinshasa, where many residents no longer follow measures aimed at preventing the spread of COVID-19. The country has so far recorded 32,000 cases and 789 deaths since March last year. 32 MPs and officials from the president's office are among those who have died of the disease. Authorities have attributed the deaths to people's laxity in following health regulations and a low vaccination coverage. Health workers have vaccinated 24,000 people out of a population of more than 80 million since the government rolled out its vaccination campaign in April. Many Congolese are reluctant to get the AstraZeneca vaccine because of fears of side effects and misinformation circulating about the jab. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Now, although COVID deaths in Africa account for around 3% of the global total, a new report warns the continent has not been spared from the spillover effects of the pandemic. Growing violence and higher unemployment rates have emerged as major challenges. The 2021 Ibrahim Forum report shows that the global economic shutdown has driven Africa into recession for the first time in 30 years. Conflict resolution and counterinsurgency efforts were scaled back, opening the door for extremist groups to capitalize on the pandemic. The report was released ahead of the annual conference of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which promotes good governance in Africa. Jay Naidu, a board member at the foundation, tells us more about the report.
There are consequences that require us to look more deeply at the type of integration we need in Africa, the economic integration, the way in which we strengthen the healthcare systems across the board, and make sure that we don't avoid, again, in our focus on COVID, that we're ignoring other major challenges that we've had in health delivery in the continent, which is HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, etc. So ultimately, it requires an integrated approach in which we rely on our own resources. We build up our own capacity and skills to manage not just this pandemic, but future pandemics that we definitely know will come. Well, I think in particular, we have to see that the involvement of young people, because demographically, 60% of the 1.3 billion Africans in our continent are now under 25, and that is increasing. We want to see the involvement of women, particularly because 90% of our food is produced by women in Africa. And we want to see a strategy that harnesses our resources and assets, which includes people, but also includes tremendous assets that fuel the global economy. And if we are smart about this, we can move from being the epicenter of hunger to being the breadbasket of the world. We can address energy, the access to clean energy, which deprives close to 700 million people the right to clean energy. We can look at a strategy that harnesses clean energy and harnesses the resources that are available to pursue a different growth model so that we're not just exporting our wealth, our commodities. And so we build resilience in the way we have an African economy going into the future.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Ethiopia says Eritrean troops involved in the Tigray war have started to pull out. And at least 20 migrants missing a day after 2 Europe-bound boats sank off the coast of Tunisia. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I enjoy being with the elephants. Sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm working. I feel like I'm just relaxing with the elephants. Just because they're very calm, they're very polite, they're very intelligent. It is much, much better to work with the elephants than with human beings.
Spending a day with the elephant is good than spending a day in town.
Emotionally, they're identical to us. In many ways, they're better than us.
If humans can live like elephants, then you will never hear these wars and enmities between people or nations. This world will be a very nice place to live in.
Ethiopia says troops from neighboring Eritrea involved in the war in Tigray have started to pull out of the country. Now, the move comes amid growing international calls for an end to hostilities and unfettered humanitarian access. The Ethiopian government, however, says proper humanitarian access is being delivered, assistance is being delivered in Tigray. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Delayed, but in the process. That is what the Ethiopian government said about the withdrawal of Eritrean troops now present in its territories.
With regards to the withdrawal of Eritrean forces, a request for the exit has already been put in place by the relevant authority, and per the Ministry of Defense reports, withdrawal has commenced. So we need to let that process play out according to the agreements with the stakeholders.
Ethiopia had previously denied that Eritrean forces were in the country, but in March, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed admitted they were there and said they would start leaving. The conflict in Tigray began in November when government forces moved to oust the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, from power in the province after it launched a surprise attacks on key federal military bases. The government has denied heavy fighting in the Tigray region at the moment.
Counterinsurgency operations by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces are now concentrated only in 2 areas where the outlawed operatives are active, and this phase is expected to soon be finalized.
The US, UK and the UN are calling for humanitarian corridors and access to relief services. Authorities here say aid work is being done in collaboration with the UN and other organizations.
Delivery of food and non-food items for 4.5 million beneficiaries in the first round, with a reported reach of 4.3 million beneficiaries in the second and third rounds, is noted and reported by the stakeholder that's responsible for this. Within the Tigray region, 93 waradas are currently, or districts, are currently being aided or provided aid, for which the federal government provides to 14 of the 93. Which means the remaining is being covered by partner organizations that are active in the area and providing humanitarian assistance.
Many in the international community are now calling for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in the north by mainly proposing round-table negotiations between the federal government of Ethiopia and TPLF. Addis Ababa says there won't be any negotiating with terrorist groups. Group Jana CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan says it plans to increase military patrols as the level of violence increases in the country. A local government in the eastern part of the country has suspended aid operations for a week after a humanitarian worker was reportedly assaulted by youth in that area. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says there has been an increase in the number of attacks along major roads in the country. There is also a rise in intercommunal violence. Some of the attacks are as a result of cattle rustling. 2 aid workers were killed last month. Humanitarian supplies from UNICEF were looted in the Pibor administrative area in the eastern part of the country. That followed an outbreak of communal violence. The UN's World Food Program says some 550 metric tons of food, enough to feed 33,000 food insecure people for a month, were looted and more destroyed in Jonglei State. The head of the UN mission in South Sudan has described the growing violence against aid workers in the country as damaging development. The UN says it is working to help South Sudan's government to try and address the security challenges.
While it is first and foremost the responsibility of the government and its security forces to protect citizens from violence, the UN is doing everything it can to help create a more secure environment. We are rebalancing our military peacekeepers to take a more nimble, robust and proactive approach to the protection of civilians.
The increase in attacks on aid workers is partly related to economic difficulties. Many host communities say aid agencies do not help provide job opportunities. South Sudan's government says it is working to address the problem. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Tunisian officials say at least 20 migrants are still missing a day after 2 Europe-bound boats sank off the coast of the North African country. 2 bodies have so far been discovered, while some 109 people were rescued. Most of the migrants were from sub-Saharan Africa. Last month, 50 migrants drowned off the coast of Tunisia in mid-May, while 100 others were rescued. Adnan Chouachi has more.
The Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights, FTDES, has reported that scores of bodies have been found floating near the coast.
The search for missing migrants continues, but it's clear that we're facing a new human tragedy near Tunisian coast. Dozens of people have drowned, while many are still missing. The irregular migrants are from Tunisia and sub-Saharan Africa.
Experts assert that more undocumented migrants will attempt the risky Mediterranean journey in the next few days.
Despite the important human and logistical means put in place by the Tunisian state, this problem of irregular migration will not stop. We have to prepare for the worst, as more and more people are attempting to cross maritime borders illegally.
The Tunisian Red Crescent, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, as well as the International Organization for Migration (IOM) in Tunisia are on alert. Volunteers are on standby to provide assistance to irregular migrants rescued by the Navy or Coast Guard.
We are working with other agencies, the regional authorities and the port administration to provide aid to the survivors. The number of people risking their lives has risen recently. As a result, there are more victims and survivors who need support and medical treatment.
The National Observatory for Migration reported a sudden increase this week in the number of undocumented migrants who departed from Tunisia to reach the Italian island of Lampedusa. Last year, the number of arrivals in Italy reached some 15,000. Tunisian authorities announced that good weather conditions are encouraging irregular migrants to try to cross from Tunisian shores to Italy. The overcrowded fishing boats and the makeshift vessels are the main means of transport for the perilous journey. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Uganda fears it may be losing the fight against tobacco use, particularly among young people who now have alternatives to cigarettes. The country's tobacco control program says knowing the effects of smoking could push smokers to quit. CGTN's Leon Senyange has more.
Charles Sawali, like many teenage boys, wanted to feel cool. He picked up one habit: smoking.
It's basically peer pressure. Got caught up with a couple of friends and puberty. It's considered cool, the rebels in school and things like that. Plus I come from a family where with quite a bit of smokers, and my father was a smoker, my older brothers.
But after more than 15 years of smoking cigarettes, he decided to quit. It was indeed a tough journey.
It was a one-day decision, but a stretched out struggle, very stretched out. It's not like you say I've quit today and then that's it. You're going to have moments where you do half a cigarette, then you really regret, and it's a mental thing. And for me to really say I quit, I had to do about 2 months of going straight, clean 2 months.
10 years on, Sawali has stayed true to his word. According to health experts, many young people attempting to quit smoking cigarettes are instead opting for what they consider the less harmful alternatives, like e-cigarettes that are finding their way on the market here. Despite a government ban, the most common and inexpensive option is the highly addictive shisha, a multi-stemmed instrument with flavored tobacco. This year's World No Tobacco Day theme is Commit to Quit, a challenge for many young people.
There are going to be certain difficulties or barriers, like there will be people around them who don't think it's such a big problem. There will be what we call triggers in the environment, which remind them or make them want to keep using the tobacco.
Uganda's tobacco control program has continuously rolled out campaigns against tobacco use. Its efforts are paying off.
We did a survey, we call it the Global Youth Tobacco Survey. We had one in 2012 and another one in 2018. We repeated one in 2018. And we noted that we had reduced tobacco use amongst young people from 17% in 2012 to 11, I think it's 10-point-something% in 2018, that recent one. So we feel that that is something that is good on our side because we've put out quite a lot of information to these young people.
As for Sawali, quitting smoking remains one of the proudest moments of his life. For a million more, the message to quit seems more urgent now than ever before. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lydia. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria struggles to bring its citizens into the regulated financial system. And South Africa's car sales bounce back in May following a COVID-19 induced slump.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Nigeria, where research has shown that 36% of adults do not have a bank account, and that's at the end of 2020. That is according to EFINA, which is a UK-backed development organization that seeks to bolster inclusive finance in Nigeria. Now, the organization also says that job losses tied to the pandemic and social distancing measures did hurt efforts to broaden access to banks. The figure was little change from 2 years ago and well above the government's goal of 20%, which it set in 2013. Now, Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, has sought to bring more of its citizens into the formal financial sector as a part of its efforts to modernize its economy. And staying in Nigeria, foreign exchange demand for food importation has continued to rise, and that's despite the central bank's ban to conserve forex and boost local production. Now, food product imports gobbled up about $1.24 billion of the foreign exchange supplied by the Apex Bank between October 2020 to March 2021. Well, as CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam now reports, insecurity, weak infrastructure and disruptions to supply chains are driving over-reliance on food imports.
38-year-old Ibrahim Forum is a major rice dealer in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Due to the high demand for this staple food, Ibrahim buys between 600 to 1,200 bags of rice monthly. His major suppliers are farmers from northern Kano State.
Shortage in supply affects us mostly because the local supply isn't enough, because what they produce here can't go around nationwide, so most of the time what we do is to mix most of our product with imported rice. If you know that you have to get like 2 or 3 trucks of rice, you have to make an order before time. If you don't make an order, you will not get the product.
Nigeria's government placed a ban on forex for food and fertilizer imports. But despite the ban, food imports more than doubled in the last quarter of 2020. The figures rose to $1.24 billion in the fourth quarter, more than twice to the same quarter of 2019.
CBN has the power to say it's limiting, but to do it without consideration of the current economic reality will really be very tough. Before you ban, you need to first ensure you have created a platform for local industry to thrive. Some food items that are not properly done locally, you're going to see inflation.
Nigeria is an import-dependent nation. Food items like sugar, cereal, and fish are still imported in high volumes. This has been worsened by the recent spate of insecurity across the nation. Volumes of local food productions have significantly dropped.
Bandits, kidnappers have taken hostage of most of our farmers, and by extension, it becomes very difficult for farmers to go to farms. So because they can't go to farm, that has affected food outputs. With limited volume of food in circulation, Nigeria certainly needs to augment.
Boosting local food production would help Nigeria cut spending on food imports. But among other things, experts say it would require intensifying security efforts and ramping up a food processing chain, especially for storage and transportation infrastructure. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And heading to South Africa now, car sales showed a remarkable recovery in May. New vehicle sales last month almost trebled. That's compared to the same month last year. Now, the vehicle market plummeted about 29% in 2020 after the country went into a hard lockdown amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's Sumitra Naidu with more.
The automotive industry is one of South Africa's largest private sector employers. It contributes 6.8% to GDP and accounts for over 1.5 million jobs, direct and indirect. The 2020 lockdowns were devastating as all areas of the industry, from motor manufacturing to dealerships, were shut down for almost 5 months.
Now it's a question of dealing with the sort of resultant economic damage, scarring, as well as to try and ascertain what's the ultimate state of the South African consumer. I think key things that have happened in the last year, for me at least, firstly is the very severe damage to GDP due to the lockdowns in response to COVID-19 last year, really decimated the industry.
But the recovery in new vehicle sales, albeit off a low base, is encouraging. According to the Automotive Business Council, 38,337 new vehicles were sold in the domestic market during May. This is up 197.8% compared with the same month last year, while also representing 7.6% growth over April sales.
We saw a significant fall in sales and also exports because of the very stringent lockdown measures that were implemented by the government. So right now we are observing a normalization of economic activity, and that is helping to support activity in the auto industry.
The concern now is just how sustainable this recovery will be. There are still supply disruptions in parts of the world that may affect imports and exports, which could also have an impact on demand.
The disruption, not just locally but globally, in the supply chain of the automotive industry. Stock is a serious challenge. A new car stock is a serious challenge to secure. It just talks to the very complex and global nature of the automotive supply and value chain. And this will take quite a long time to work its way through the system.
For now, motor manufacturing in South Africa is back on track. And while car sales are showing a strong bounce back, it may still be some time before the sector reaches pre-COVID levels. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And now to some international news. U.S. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order that expands a ban on U.S. investments in companies Washington says are linked to China's military. Now, Thursday's move extends a Trump-era blacklist to China's defense and surveillance technology sectors. The amended order says the ban will take effect on August 2nd for those companies currently listed. And the Treasury Department will update on a rolling basis the new list of about 59 companies. A spokesperson from the Chinese Foreign Ministry says China will take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
The move severely disrupts normal market rules and order. It not only undermines the lawful rights and interests of the Chinese companies, but also hurts the interests of global investors, including those in the U.S. The U.S. should respect rule of law and the market correct its mistakes, and stop actions that undermine the global financial market order and investors' lawful rights and interests.
Meanwhile, the 24th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum has kicked off in Russia's second-largest city with strict health and safety measures. Now, entrepreneurs will talk about building ties for the pandemic and post-pandemic era in the next few days. Well, China and Russia saw an increase in mutual trade. Amongst the reasons, shared land borders, expanding railway connections, and trading in mutual currencies. Well, our Alihosa Milenkovic brings us one Russian company that has been taking advantage of the improved trade ties with China.
This is Russia's prime quality Angus beef. Packed, stacked, and kept in a cold environment in this storage facility in Moscow, ready to be shipped to China. It is produced in Voronezh, some 500 kilometers south of Moscow, in an eco-clean and pristine environment. In the middle of a rampaging epidemic, the company that produces these prime steaks started exports to China.
Our processing capacity is 40,000 tons per year, and our expectations for this year are to export around 2,500 tons. And if we are looking forward to the next year, those figures could be better, depending on how the Chinese market accepts our products.
This isn't the only example of a Russian company which has started exporting to China. Most of those new exporters focus on agricultural products, which Russia is producing more and more of. As a result of this increased interest in China's market, agricultural exports from Russia rose by 17.6% in the first quarter of this year alone. And last year, Russian beef exports to China just exploded with a 25-fold increase.
Trade volume is increasing at cosmic-like speeds. Compared with last year, or even until the coronavirus pandemic started, it's like the sky and the earth. It's being seen even in areas with more exporting difficulties due to laws and regulations, like meat and milk exports.
Exporters of other food products like chocolate and candy have far fewer regulatory hurdles for exporting to China, and they are using those opportunities. Overall trade between China and Russia in 2020 reached just over $107 billion, and 25% of that figure was traded in the national currencies. The pandemic just sped up both processes, which will have a massive positive impact on their economies at the end of the day. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, St. Petersburg.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but still to come on Global Business Africa. A study calls for a reprieve for poor nations who are struggling to meet their dues amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, researchers in South Africa hope to deter rhino poachers with radioactive markers.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Researchers in South Africa are hoping to inject radioactive materials into rhino horns as a way of deterring poaching. The pilot project is being undertaken in partnership with Russia's State Nuclear Energy Corporation, Rosatom. As CGTN's Susan Mongeli reports, the researchers are first trialling non-radioactive, stable isotopes in the horns.
Igor and Denver may appear like any other pair of rhinos within the Buffalo Kloof Private Game Reserve in Eastern Cape. But the two herbivores have traces of non-radioactive materials inserted in their horns. Researchers from Wits University are working on a method to deter smuggling of rhino horns in ports across the world.
We hope to establish a reduction in poaching. We want to do this by injecting a small quantity of radioactive isotope into the horns of rhino. And this, we hope, will have two effects. One, it will devalue the rhino horn in the eyes of the end user, the person who's kind of buying it in the Far East. Because if we make it radioactive, people are going to be less inclined to want to own something like that, because rhino horn is used for a number of different things.
Demand for rhino horns is mainly in Asia, where they are believed to have medicinal value. South Africa is home to the largest rhino population in the world. However, the country has been grappling with poaching for decades. Tracking has been at the center of the fight against illegal poaching.
By making the horn radioactive, it makes it a lot easier to track a horn if it's been taken from the animal and a smuggler is now trying to move it across international borders, because there's something like between 10 and 11,000 installed radiation monitors at various different ports, airports, border crossings and things like that.
Apart from poaching, cyclic droughts linked to climate change have impacted rhino populations in South Africa. In the Kruger National Park only, rhino numbers reduced by almost 2/3 in 2 decades. The latest South African National Parks report shows the number reduced from 11,000 to less than 4,000 between 2018 and 2019. Susan Mongeli, CGTN.
Well, Saturday marks World Environment Day, and this year's theme is centered on ecosystem restoration. One company in Kenya is doing just that by getting as many people as possible to plant trees using seed balls. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma has that report.
5 hours drive from Kenya's capital, Nairobi, is a village in Kajiado where people compete using slingshots to see who can shoot farthest. At first glance, this scene may not say much about growing trees. But the seed balls used together with the slingshots make for an entertaining way to plant trees.
We can throw out seed balls at any time of the year. If it rains enough, the seed ball will slowly absorb the rain. It holds the water inside. It gives the seed more chance to actually open up and germinate. But if it doesn't rain, it stays. It waits.
The survival rate of the seed balls is 20 to 30% for the first year. Those that fail to germinate in the first year still have a chance to do so in subsequent years. Their charcoal covering prevents them from being eaten by birds or rodents. One of Seed Ball Kenya's ambition is to carry out aerial seeding programs which cover a much larger area. According to the co-founder of the company, Teddy Kinyanjui, a similar program in China inspired him.
And they've been doing it for more than 30 years, and they've planted over 70,000 hectares of land. And seeing that success, I think it's China, Canada, New Zealand are probably the leaders in the world of doing aerial seeding for forests at the moment. And Kenya's hot on their heels.
We have seen the importance of trees. The rains will come where the trees are. The area was ugly when it had no trees, and now that the trees have started growing in this area, the area started to look beautiful.
A desire to plant trees they hope will attract more people into following suit and greening the environment. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
Coming up in your sports news.